There is a quiet rewiring that occurs, invisible to everyone, felt only by you. It isn't marked by a specific incident. There is no defining scene to reference. Change arrives in increments, almost imperceptibly. Initially, it registers as a mild bewilderment, not as acute agony, not as a fracture, just a soft awareness that an old resonance is missing. You reflect on an interaction and see your emotional reply arrived later than it should have. Not from indifference, but because something hesitated. That hesitation is unfamiliar. Before, your feelings were instantaneous. You extended, clarified, accommodated. Now, a sliver of time exists where nothing stirs. It is minute. An outsider wouldn't detect it, but you do. You sense the lag. You sense your physical stillness while your awareness observes, and that observation feels foreign. When it recurs, you rationalize it as a minor glitch, just an off day, simple fatigue. Yet it persists. Its form varies. At times it's an emotional neutrality. Other times, it's a quiet detachment. Or it's the lack of an internal echo you anticipated. The most disquieting part is your continued presence. You are listening. You are there, yet a fundamental internal motion has ceased. You no longer surge forward into the moment. You don't incline emotionally. You don't assimilate as you once did. It isn't a conscious choice. It resembles a synaptic pathway that has gone quiet. Those around you remain unaware initially. Why wouldn't they? You are still courteous, still answering, still superficially present. But inside, the fabric has altered. Emotional stimuli no longer pass through you the same. They land and settle. And you begin to ponder, when did this start? Was it creeping? Did I miss the origin point? You scan your history for a clear trigger, a conflict, a disloyalty, a rupture, but find none. Only a sequence of subtle moments that bore more weight than seemed logical, remarks that lingered too long, pauses that resonated more than speech. Nothing overt enough to warrant a transformation. Still, a transformation occurred. That is the source of the confusion. If questioned about what is different, you would lack an answer. You wouldn't know where to start because nothing is overtly broken. The world turns, connections remain, dialogue flows. But you have quietly ceased offering something. You've stopped preemptively soothing. You've stopped automatically absorbing ambient tension. You've stopped sensing silence, not by design, not from defensiveness. It simply no longer occurs to you. There's a sensation of witnessing yourself from a short remove. Not disconnection, not emptiness, but rather a state of containment. As if an inner mechanism decided to retain rather than radiate. Others might label this as growing colder, more withdrawn, less vibrant. But those terms feel inaccurate. Cold suggests feeling has vanished. Withdrawn implies strategy. This feels like a silent recalibration issued by a deeper authority. You still experience depth, often profound depth, but you no longer gravitate toward those sensations instinctively. You allow them to reside within, and that internal residence changes everything. The most profound withdrawal is not from others, but from your own former self. Before, intimacy felt intuitive, fluid. Now intimacy demands an additional variable. Time demonstrated safety, consistency, and even then, there's a quiet assessment, not anxiety, but discernment. You notice how swiftly others presume access, how readily they assume you'll shoulder emotional cargo, how frequently they lean without verifying your stability. These realities didn't rankle before, or perhaps they did, but you didn't consciously note them. Now you do, and once observed, they cannot be unseen. This is where the common narrative fractures. Conventional wisdom says repeated wounds make you callous, that they seal your heart, make you defensive. But your internal reality doesn't match hardening. It matches consolidation. Like a substance that once flowed outward is now gathered inward, not hidden, but preserved. You notice your expressions becoming more contained, yet sharper. Less language, more space. You hear more than you say. You watch more than you participate. And strangely, this doesn't feel burdensome. It feels grounded. That is the puzzling part. If this were damage, wouldn't it ache more? If this were shut down, wouldn't it feel hollow? It does not. It feels measured, purposeful, even though you didn't consciously elect it. There's another nuance you cannot disregard. The compulsion to clarify your position has dissolved. Previously, being misunderstood felt urgent, perilous. Now it feels permissible. You let people misinterpret you. You allow false assumptions to stand uncorrected, not to inflict payback, but because the correction feels superfluous. That is novel, and it unnerves others. They detect the shift. They simply lack the vocabulary for it, so they test. They press familiar emotional triggers. These used to elicit a response. They recycle old dynamics. They await the predictable reaction. Sometimes it doesn't arrive, and when it doesn't, they feel unbalanced. They feel steady, not victorious, not remote, simply undisturbed. But steadiness is often misread. It leads people to conclude you've ceased valuing, but valuation hasn't evaporated. It has simply ceased its uncontrolled emission. Something within has learned to cohere silently, without fanfare. And that is where the genuine inquiry begins to crystallize. If this isn't closure, isn't aloofness, isn't chilliness, then what is it? Because this phenomenon didn't spring from a solitary event. It emerged from repetition. From a particular demand placed upon you again and again, until the internal answer autonomously changed. And once that answer changed, it required no proclamation. It merely ceased replying in the former manner. That is the element most overlook, and the element you haven't completely defined yourself. At a certain juncture, you recognize you are no longer bracing in the old way. There was an era where every encounter held a subtle preparation or readiness to receive, to adapt, to create room. That readiness isn't extinct, but it's no longer reflexive. Now, before you extend yourself emotionally, an internal checkpoint engages. It's not trepidation, not scheming, but recognition. You recognize patterns with accelerated clarity. You sense when a transaction requests more than it returns. You feel when proximity arrives devoid of genuine stewardship. And instead of overriding that signal, you hesitate. This hesitation is what people misdiagnose. They believe you're retreating. They believe you're powering down. They believe repeated suffering finally sealed you off. But internally, nothing is sealed. Something has reconfigured. What appears as distance is actually a refusal to dissipate. What reads as coldness is actually consolidation. What looks like retreat is the cessation of automatic self-revelation. This is where the uncomfortable truth resides. Repeated injury doesn't render an empath insensate. It instructs them in discernment without a single lecture. Over duration, the nervous system learns what the conscious mind attempted to disregard. It learns that transparency without mutuality isn't bond. That compassion without safeguards isn't virtue. That perpetual approachability quietly consumes a core resource. So the organism adapts before the personal narrative updates, stops presenting its entirety up front. It stops leaning in by reflex, stops interpreting quiet as its sole responsibility. This adaptation doesn't register as power in the instant. It registers as equipoise. But equipoise is potent because equipoise means you are no longer yanked by every emotional current in the vicinity. You still perceive, you still experience. You just don't distribute it all instantaneously. That is the transformation. And it alters how you relate in ways you cannot fully articulate. You no longer pursue exhaustive clarity. You no longer mend misinterpretations at your own depletion. You no longer rush to comfort someone who hasn't demonstrated reciprocal regard. You permit situations to disclose their own nature. Some individuals draw nearer when this occurs. They decelerate. They meet you in your new terrain. Others become agitated. They feel the absence of your prior receptivity. They feel the loss of your emotional stewardship. They don't know how to connect without it, so they categorize the change. They say you've changed, become more rigid, less radiant. But radiance was never the deficit. The deficit was in boundaries. Repeated ache taught you something no lecture ever could. That being accessible isn't synonymous with being secure. That giving boundlessly doesn't ensure comprehension. That remaining vulnerable at all costs ultimately costs you your core. It's when inner faculty learn to shut the gate softly, not to slam it, not to bolt it. Just to shut it sufficiently to allow respiration. Sensitivity, once a flood, becomes a well deep, contained and protected. This is the segment seldom discussed. When an empath is wounded chronically, they don't first grow distant from others, they grow nearer to themselves. They begin to notice when a situation feels misaligned before it crystallizes into hurt. They trust the hesitation. They allow quiet to perform part of the labor, and once that transpires, a return to the prior mode is impossible. Because the prior mode required them to fade quietly so others could remain at ease. This new mode doesn't request authorization. It doesn't declare itself. It merely endures. And that endurance is what reshapes reality. You remain fully capable of profound linkage. But linkage now possesses a threshold. It possesses rhythm. It possesses conditions, and codified rules, but lived principles. From the exterior, it may resemble emotional disengagement. On the interior, it feels like integration. And here is the lingering, unresolved verity. Repeated suffering didn't reduce your sensitivity. It privatized your sensitivity. It taught you that not every felt experience requires an audience. That not every person merits entry to your inner sanctum. That restraint can be an expression of self-regard. And once that lesson integrates, your external manifestations will never appear the same again. Not because you are damaged, but because something within elected to remain intact, quietly, without justification. And if someone observes that you no longer react as you once did, if they sense the void where your former emotional availability resided, if they perceive that a shift has transpired, they are correct. Something did. But it isn't what they presume. It is the silent signal of someone who learned, through slow, relentless repetition, that staying undefended is not love, and who finally chose to remain complete instead. If this articulation of the quiet transformation resonates with you, the greatest support you can offer this channel, Winds of Thought, is to press the leak button. It directly helps these messages reach others navigating similar internal shifts. And of course, subscribe for more explorations into the architecture of the self. The rewiring is not an end. It is a more coherent beginning.